So one of the things that I'm sure is a lot of consideration of people is the difference between different types of diet styles. For example, there are things such as vegetarian, there is vegan, there is even paleo. So I'm sure in the context of you living on campus or maybe living by close by campus, having maybe concerns about how much money you spend on food, even more importantly, being concerned about how much nutrition you're getting and how important your nutrition is to you for your health and well-being, how do you incorporate those concerns into perhaps becoming vegetarian, becoming vegan, or even going on a paleo diet, for example? So let's talk a little bit about the differences between the three, because maybe that's an important point to be mentioned as well in terms of what are some of those differences if you're not familiar already. And I can tell you, me personally, I grew up in a household where we ate for taste, not for health. So the idea of being vegetarian or vegan or paleo or anything else with a label didn't even really have a consideration for me growing up. I was just eating for taste. I certainly was not eating for health up until a point where I made a conscious decision to make sure that I was making decisions based on a health choice as opposed to just simply a taste choice. So let's get back to a few of these diets. For example, vegetarian. A vegetarian can be different forms. It's mostly eating a plant-based diet. It's mostly eating fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, seeds, but there are different distinctions that people like to make. So for example, maybe they're a lacto-vegetarian, meaning that they still eat dairy food. They still eat food that comes from basically a cow, which we would consume either as milk or as some sort of a whole food, solid food like cheese or yogurt or ice cream. So that's a lacto-vegetarian. An ovo-vegetarian would be somebody who still eats eggs, probably primarily chicken, but they could be different types of birds. But that would be somebody who would call themselves an ovo-vegetarian. Then you have people who call themselves a pesco-vegetarian. These are people who still eat fish. For some reason, some people do not look at fish per se as being a type of meat. It's looked at as a different type of animal, and so they still call themselves predominantly vegetarian, but they're still eating fish, so they call themselves pesco-vegetarian. And then of course, among those three different types, they could be some combination of two or even all three. Then you have people like me who are considered vegan, who mean that they do not eat any animal tissue of any sort whatsoever, even going as far as to excluding honey from the diet. So if it comes from an animal source, basically a vegan, somebody who labels themselves as a vegan will not be eating that food. And then you have people like paleo people. Paleo people are much more concerned with the ratios of the nutrients that we've mentioned in other objectives, along with excluding certain foods. So for example, paleo people do not believe in eating grains at all. They think grains were not fit for human consumption. They also do not believe in eating dairy of any sort. So the paleo people focus specifically on food as it came from nature, either from a tree or out of the ground, or as it came from an animal. So they focus on a lot of protein, they focus on a lot of fat, and then they get a little bit of carbohydrate, but the carbohydrate they get is mostly from vegetable. They really do not advocate it all for fruit. And then they do incorporate some nuts and seeds, but it depends on those as well. So it's quite a different philosophy from the vegetarian or vegan or even what you might call the standard American diet. It's definitely focused much more on a whole food consumption approach so that you're not getting a lot of processing, but you are getting a lot of animal food. Now, what does the science say about this? You might be concerned about what does the science actually say about the best health approach to living a long life, to preventing chronic disease, to generally being healthy and happy and well. Well, the reality is that the paleo people probably will be in for a rude surprise, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of articles showing the benefit on eating a predominantly plant-based diet. Even if you don't go all the way to being vegan, which some people might think or believe is rather extreme, and again, there are only about maybe 1% of Americans who label themselves as vegan, and then there are another 3 or 4% who label themselves as some version of vegetarian. But if you go to PubMed, if you go to Google Scholar, if you go to any search engine of your choice, and you start looking up scientific articles that have been published on the benefits of eating a whole food plant-based diet, what you will discover is that there, again, are literally hundreds, if not thousands of articles that have been published on the benefits of eating a plant-based diet or a predominantly plant-based diet. And this benefits you across the board in every organ system, and even helps to prevent an early death due to either cardiovascular disease of some form or some form of cancer primarily. And then you have other things like bone disease, liver disease, eye disease, kidney disease, all sorts of different diseases and conditions that actually are related to dietary patterns. And so shifting yourself, if you're not already there, to eating a predominantly whole food plant-based diet to something more akin to what's the standard American approach, where we eat a lot of heavy processed food, a lot of animal food, sugary, fatty, salty food, and something to a more natural approach, you're going to be much better off in the long run. And again, as I mentioned earlier in one of the other objectives for this module, the things that we do every day in terms of what we put in our mouth, that creates something very strong, and over time it creates something even stronger, because a lot of these chronic diseases, whether they're cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, something else, they don't really result like that. They don't occur just from one day to the next. These things take years to actually occur as something that you go to your physician and he tells you, I'm sorry to tell you, you have type 2 diabetes. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes years to occur. And so whether it's through a process of inflammation leading to something like atherosclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries, hardening of your arteries, or something like carcinogenesis, which is actually the process of creating cancer. Again, these things take typically a very long time to occur. And the reason why they occur is predominantly, without question, through what we put into our mouths, through what we eat and what we drink. So it's so much more important than any other factor in terms of exercise, sleep, stress management. The only thing that would even come close would be things like the use of tobacco or alcohol related to specific forms of cancer or heart disease. But again, these are very specific behaviors. But overwhelmingly, the majority of behavior that's attributed to all forms of chronic disease is nutrition. And then secondarily, if you're eating a predominantly whole food plant-based diet, you're going to create all those protective factors that help to keep you happy and healthy and live a long and happy life.